Hello and welcome to Lesson 4 in this Excel Beginner series. If you haven't done so already, I highly encourage you to complete the earlier lessons by clicking on the playlist in the top right hand corner of the screen now. This lesson will be primarily focused on how to sum up data based on criteria. Let's take a look at the learning objectives in more detail. We'll look at how to sum up data in a column based on a condition. We'll introduce two new formulas called SUBTOTAL and SUMIF. We'll look at moving blocks of data around within our sheet using cut, copy and paste and the insert function, and how data is stored on the clipboard and how to remove it. Finally, we'll look at how to not lose your head when dealing with large data tables using a new function called freeze panes. So if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to open your existing file that we created in previous lessons and join me when you're done. Let's begin once again today by tidying up our current data a little bit. So let's select columns F through to I, right click on them and delete. Gets rid of all that data. Then let's select rows 9 through to 11, right click on those and delete once again. So today we're going to focus on some other examples of conditional counting. So let's imagine that instead of one set of data that we have today, so we have a set of students in a table, we're recording their attendance and their test scores. So let's imagine we had two classes and we wanted to know which class scored the most points. So to start with, let's add in some extra data so that we can check that. So let's go ahead and add a new column. So if we click on the header in column C, right click then and just click insert, we can put a new column in here. And let's header this column with a title of class. And all of our existing students we're going to put in class A. So let's just populate each of those cells with an A. Okay. And now let's add some new students who will be in class B. So you can choose whichever method that you want to create your new section of table. So probably the easiest way is to highlight all the rows from 2 to 8, right click, select copy, and then if we just select the row here and then insert copied cells. So let's highlight all of the data here from A through to E and just hit the delete key. And there we go. Let's put in some new names. Assign these new people to class B. The attendance is not really important, so if we just highlight these that we've currently got in column D and just drag it down as we've done before, just so that we've got some data in there. So I'm going to show you now a neat little method for generating random numbers. So as you might have guessed, it's a formula that's already within Excel, and if we just type in equals, start typing random, we can see here this formula here, rand between, which returns a random number between the numbers you specify. So if we double click on that, we can see it needs a bottom and a top number. So let's give it a bottom number of 1 and a top number of 100. And if we press enter, after closing the bracket, you can see there it generates a random number, and we can just drag that down there. Okay, so there we go. So we've saved ourselves a little bit of time by generating random numbers. The only problem with this is that it's going to run that formula every time we do something. So just to show you that, let's just type something here. And we press enter, and you see now those 5 numbers have changed. So we don't really want it to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the formula from this, but we're going to keep the numbers. And we do that by, if we select the whole column here, if you right click on it, select copy, right click on the selection again, and we're going to use a special paste function, which is this one here, which is the little clipboard with 1, 2, 3 on it, and it says values when you hover over it. So pasting values just means it's going to take whatever you can currently see on the screen in that cell and put it back there. So if we click that, you can see the data hasn't changed at all, but what you can see now is that we have no formulas anymore in these cells. So it means now that when we do something, it's not going to change because it's not generating a new formula. Okay, so that's a quicker and easier way to generate random numbers. So now we've got two classes of people. We've got their attendance and we've got their test scores. So how do we go about finding the total score for each class? So there are a number of methods we could choose to do this, and let's explore each of them and have a look at each of the advantages and disadvantages versus use them. So let's first though record what it is that we want to track. So in cell G2 here, let's put a title of class A total score, and in the cell below let's put class B total score. And we'll make this cell a little bit bigger by clicking between columns G and H. There. So the first method that we're going to do is just a reiteration and a look again, once again, at using the sort methodologies on the table to produce this result. So as we saw in the last lesson, these arrows that we have here on our sort and filter for each column can be used to show a subset of the data that we have displayed there. So in this example, let's take the class column. So we can see now currently it's showing results for column A and results for class B. So if we take off class B, we can see now that the results are filtered just by class A. And we can see here all of the test scores for class A. And if we simply highlight them all by holding down the left mouse button, we can see in the bottom right hand corner, it tells us that the sum is 561. And we can enter that now in the cell H2. Let's just put a title on this and let's just call this the sort method. And again, just make this column a bit wider by double clicking here. There we go. So we could then do exactly the same for class B. So we go back to our filter here on column C, class, untick A and tick on B. And then if we click OK, we can see now we're just displaying results for class B. Oh, but hang on. Our titles here have totally disappeared from column G. Now why is that? So it's because we've sorted this table here in column C. And remember, originally, class A was in rows 3 through to 8. And now we've taken those away, so we can't see them. So this again is just something you have to be aware of in the design of your sheets, so that when you want to use filtering and sorting functions, that you don't actually remove visual things that you want to see. So again, if we just clear this filter here by clicking on it and selecting clear filter, we can see this comes back. So we want to avoid this problem. An easy way to do this would be to either put this data on a separate tab on another sheet, and then it wouldn't matter what you sorted here, you would still be able to see it on the other sheet. But we don't really want to be flicking between sheets for the purposes of this lesson. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put this data above the table that we've currently got visible, so that it doesn't matter when we're sorting the columns below, we'll still be able to see the results that we're tracking. Now you may think you can do this simply by copying the data that we've currently got and pasting it above the table, but let's have a look and see what actually happens when we try and do this. So if we select our data here, so cells G1 down to H3, if we right click on it, select copy, and then let's say we wanted to put it above the table, so we'd click in cell A1 for example, then right click, and let's just use the normal paste function, the clipboard here. Oh, that doesn't look right, so what it's done is just overwritten the data that's already there, so we don't want that to happen. So let's just press Ctrl and Z to undo that action. And let's try a different paste methodology. So what we could have done was right clicked and selected here, insert copied cells from the drop down. So what will that do? Well, this is going to prompt us to say, what do you want to do with the existing data in the table? Do you want to move the cells to the right, or do you want to move the cells down? So let's say we selected shift cells right, and let's click OK. So what it's done now is put our data in cell A1 and it's pushed across the existing data. So that's not what we want to happen either. So let's press Ctrl and Z again to go back. And just for completeness, let's try the last option, which is Insert Copied Cells and Shift Cells Down. So this time we get an error warning message to say this will change a filtered range on your worksheet. So the reason for that is we're trying to put data into columns A and B where we've already got a filter sort set up, and we wanted to say push this down, but we've already got a filter sort set up, so it's not going to let us do that. So we'll just click OK. None of those methodologies worked. So what we actually need to do is we need to put in some blank rows above the table so that we can paste our data into it. Now remember, right now, the data that we did copy is still in the memory. So I'm just going to show you something when you try and paste in some new rows now. So let's just put in like 5 new rows by selecting rows 1 through to 5. And if we right click now, we can see we've only got the option to insert copied cells. We don't have the option to just insert a row. And what happens when we say insert copied cells is we get the same problem as we had before. Now, why is that? Well, it's because in the memory, so on the clipboard, we still have this data here that we copied. So if we want to just insert some blank rows, we need to get rid of this. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's click cancel because we don't want to do that. And if we go to the top left of the screen here, we can see this clipboard word here, and right next to it there's a small icon, a little square with an arrow in, and if we click on that we can see the contents of the clipboard. So it tells us here this is what we've got. So if we clear this by clicking on clear all and then close this clipboard window, now if we select rows 1 through 5 as we were going to before, right click on them, we can see now you've just had the option to insert. So it's just going to put some blank rows in now. And there we go. So we've now got 5 blank rows up at the top. So now we can just select this data that we wanted to copy. So we're going to move it, so we're just going to cut it. So cutting will remove it and not leave the data where it was. Select say A1, and this time we're just going to say paste. So normal paste, yeah. And it gives us a preview of what we're going to say. Click on the clipboard, and there we go. So we've now got our data above the table. So now, when we sort our class by class B, it no longer affects what we can see on the sheet. And once again, if we go down to the bottom here, if we select our data that we can see in test scores, go down to the bottom, we can see now it's telling us we've got a sum of 361. So that would be a manual way of using sort to do this calculation. The problem with this manual method is the same as we've seen before. So whenever you change the data, i.e. if you add new data or remove it, you would then have to redo the sort, highlight the cells again and get your total. So it's not dynamic and it doesn't update. So let's have a look at a slightly different method which we haven't looked at before here, called SUBTOTAL. But first we're going to clear this data from class. So clear filter from class. So let's go ahead and prep this column by entering in cell C1 a title subtotal. And subtotal is a formula that allows us to make counts and various other functions on columns of data once they've been sorted. And it will dynamically update based on what's seen. So let's see an example of that. So we're going to calculate class A total score. So let's start by typing the equal sign into cell C2 and type in subtotal. So we can see here, and it tells us the description is it returns a subtotal in a list or database. And if we double click on it, we can see we get a list of features that it does. So there's quite a few different things here. So we're just going to focus on counting a sum. So this is a sum, which is number 9. So you can double click on it, or you could have typed 9 yourself, but after it you need to type a comma, and then we'll give it a reference of what to count. So we want to count these things here. So highlight them and then close our bracket. So right now it's giving us a total sum of everything in that column, and we can verify that just highlighting it here. Looking down at the bottom right, we can see there the sum is 922, and we can see here that matches the subtotal. But the power of subtotal comes that when we apply now a filter to the table, this total is going to update based on what is visible in the table. So again, if we filter our class, take off B, just leave A, we can see now the subtotal updates to 561, which is class A's total score, which we calculated before by the sort method. Same total. And now if we change it to class B, we can see it gives us the class B total. So you can see already that the issue with this formula is that it's updating dynamically based on what we can see. So if you wanted to always track what class A's total score was and always track what class B's total score was, we couldn't do that because it would constantly change based on what we'd filtered the table by. So we need another methodology. And now we're going to introduce a new formula called SUMIF. So let's title it here in cell D1. As the name suggests, SUMIF will perform a sum of data based on some criteria that we specify. And what we're going to tell it basically is we're going to tell it to add up the test scores in column E for when it's class A or when it's class B. So let's start doing that by clearing the filter first out of class. There we go. And we're going to once again type equals SUMIF. And we can see the description of this formula adds the cells specified by a given condition or criteria. Now that sounds quite complicated, but if we double click on it, we can see it simply needs a range, criteria, and then the sum range. So the first range that we're going to pick is where we want to specify our criteria. And we want to specify whether it's class A or class B. So we're going to keep this really simple, and we're just going to say if anything in column C is A to begin with. So remember, to have a whole column, we select C:C. Alternatively, we could have just clicked here on the column header, and it would automatically put that in for us. Next, we need to specify the criteria. So we put a comma in first. And the first criteria we want is we want class A's total score. So we only want to make a sum if what is in this column is the letter A. So let's put that in. Speech marks A, speech marks. And then a comma again. And the last thing now it needs is a sum range. So we want it to add up everything that's in column E if there is an A in column C. So again, we'll just click on column E here and close our bracket. And there we go. So it's told us that 561 is the total. And that's because we've told it to only add up what is in column E if column C has an A in it. So this is a really, really powerful function. And now we can simply copy this formula into the next cell. So you can actually copy it just from the formula bar here. And then right clicking and copy. But remember to press enter after you've done that, otherwise you will change something. Then if you double click on the formula bar again here, then we can press column A, paste here. And now this time we want to count if the value in column C is a B. So we'll change this from A to B. And there we go, we've got 361. And the powerful thing about this version of the formula is it doesn't matter now how much data we add. So let's just take a block of data out of here. So from rows 10 to 15, let's press Ctrl and C to copy it, and Ctrl and V to paste it down here. It now constantly adds up. So it's now giving us a new result based on our new data straight away. It also doesn't matter what order we sort it in. So let's sort it, for example, in order of attendance, Z to A. So putting the yeses at the top doesn't matter. It now still counts it because it's counting it only based on there being an A in cell C and the value that's in cell E. So that's a really powerful formula and super useful in many different scenarios. So we can see now that our data table is actually getting quite long, and if we actually expand these rows here to be as big as the ones up here, so remember how to do that. So if we just select the row here, select Format Painter, and then drag it over these rows down here, it will make them bigger. We can now see that actually our data has now disappeared off the bottom of the screen. And if we scroll down, so as our data gets longer, so let's make it even longer, we can see now that we can no longer see the headers on the table. Now we've only got a few things to remember and it's quite obvious what's in each column, but when you're looking at larger tables, this can be problematic. So I'm going to show you first a quick trick to get back to the top of the table quickly. So if you click anywhere in the table, hold down the Control key and press the up arrow, it will jump back to the top of the table, providing there are no blank rows within that dataset. And what we're going to do here is use something which is called freeze panes. And freeze panes will freeze the screen in a certain place so that it will never move. So if we select the cell A7 here, which has Adam in, we go to the View menu at the top and select this option here, which is called Freeze Panes, by clicking on the little down arrow. And we have a few different options here. So we have Freeze Panes, which keeps rows and columns visible where the rest of the worksheet scrolls. We have Freeze Top Row, which keeps the top row visible. And we have Freeze First Column. So we're going to actually use the one called Freeze Panes. And what this will do now, and it'll be really obvious when you see it, is it'll stop the row above disappearing when we scroll down the screen. So there we go, if we click it, and now if we scroll down the screen, you can see that row now never moves. So we can always see the data titles above the data that we actually have. And in fact, all of these first 6 rows won't move because we've used the freeze panes option. So let's just have a look at the other 2 options under freeze panes so that we understand how they work. So first, we'll just unfreeze our existing panes so that the sheet goes back to behaving how it did before. So there we go, our headers are scrolling off the top when we scroll. So the second option here is to freeze the top row. And as the description says, what that's going to do is freeze row 1 so that it doesn't move. So if we click that now and we scroll down, we can see there that row 1 never changes. It's always visible. So that's useful if the header on your table is actually on the first row on the sheet. So let's once again unfreeze. And the final option is to freeze first column. So similar to freezing top row, what this is going to do is this is going to freeze column A. So this is useful if you have a horizontal table where your headers are actually down the left-hand side of the table in column A. So if we freeze that first column now, when we move across to the right of the sheet, we can see now that column A is always fixed. So again, that's useful if you have a horizontal table. We can just unfreeze the panes again now. And what we will do is we'll leave the freeze panes on there for A7. And there we go. And it goes back now to keeping the nice headers on our tables. There we go. So that's a useful feature for when you're working with much larger data sets and tables, to making sure that you can always see the header above your data so that you remember what is supposed to be in the column. And that's everything I wanted to cover today. So let's take a moment to just recap what we learned. We learned how to add up data in a column based on a condition or criteria in another column. We introduced some new functions called SUBTOTAL and SUMIF that allowed us to do this. We looked at moving small blocks of data around our existing table and how what was stored on the clipboard impacted our ability to do this. We looked at how to empty the clipboard to make sure that we can paste blank rows above our table. And finally, we looked at how to make sure our column headers were always visible even when we had lots and lots of data that scrolled off the bottom of the screen using the various forms of the freeze panes function. If you did enjoy today's content and found it useful, be sure to hit that like, thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you in the next lesson.